There's a link below this video. Please click it if you want to enhance your male parts. All right. All right. If you, I mean, apparently it works very well. Don't tell me if it does work. Okay. All right.
This is why
it helps the channel when you buy something from that link. Just let you know.
I mean, it's funny because I think that, you know, the issue that you started to become really politically prominent on, which is the Bill C-16 in Ontario and
Canada, it was federal law.
In Canada, the gender issue.
Yeah.
You know, that's the issue where now the question that's constantly being asked, so why do you even care? Why do you even pay attention? And the answer is because...
I was asked that earlier today.
Oh, really? What did you say?
I'm not letting the cat have my tongue.
Yeah.
It's like it has nothing to do with gender as far as I'm concerned, or that's peripheral in some sense. So the accusation, why do you care? Fair enough. It's like, you know, in some way, people can go to hell in a handbasket if they're inclined to. Now, I would rather have that not happen, but...
He said, man, listen, you all in my business, man. You can go to hell in a handbasket. But he's too cool to outrightly say that. He's not going to say that. He's just, you know what I mean? He's just classy dude.
Basket if they're inclined to. Now, I would rather have that not happen, but people are, what would you say, doomed to their own autonomy. But I'm not saying words that other people want me to say. And the idea of compelled speech, it's like the bill was this much about gender.
Right.
And it was this much about,
right.
Oh yeah, the government's going to tell me what to say, hey.
But
now they're regulating what therapists can say, therapy sessions.
This is interesting because to me, the problem with a lot of this is less a free speech issue, even though I'm on the same page with you. And to me, it really is a fundamental truth issue. Meaning that, yeah, you're trying to force me to say something I don't want to say. But to me, the fact that what you're trying to force me to say is so innately opposed to...
I just want to say that I really like this style of sit down conversations. Now, the background noise that might get on you guys' nerves, hopefully it don't. It doesn't bother me at all. I do notice it, but I think that these guys sitting down having this type of conversation in a public setting with other young adults nearby and whatnot. They might even be at a university for all I know. But I think it's healthy. I think it's good that people see this type of dialogue, whether they agree on everything or they don't. I would love to see them on a topic where they differ in opinion, just so I can see how they both handle it. But yeah.
To me, the fact that what you're trying to force me to say is so innately opposed to the good is the problem. Like you could try. I would have objections to you forcing me to say that I like a particular movie, right? It may not be true. I don't like the particular movie. It would be bad if you tried to force me to say that. But the level of passion that I have for issues like this one really go to the fact that I think the fundamental good of humanity relies on basic acknowledgments of biological truth, especially when it comes to gender. And anybody who's ever dealt with children, I find myself getting, you know, if I look at my own political evolution, I'd say that when I grew up in a religious home, so that means that pretty conservative. And then you go to college and you're living by yourself and you're not married, you don't have kids. You tend to become a little bit more libertarian, which is like, okay, you know, let everybody do whatever they're going to do and it's not going to bother me. And then you have kids and you realize that there's a pool in which we are all swimming. And that pool is going to define...
Virginia.
Exactly. Like my kid, it's going to determine how my kid lives. And I want my community to reflect some of my values because I don't want my kid to live in the toxic sludge that you are creating for my kid. I don't want you indoctrinating my kids in bullshit about it.
I like the fact that he said that we are all products of our environment, and he was brought up in a certain type of way, and he want his children to be brought up in a certain type of way with certain values and whatnot. That's important to him. Now, one thing that I just want for anybody who are big fans of Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson or anyone who you know for certain have touched people the wrong way with the way that they put their beliefs out there. Y'all need to understand this. You cannot go in anybody's backyard, walk in anyone's kitchen or bedroom and judge them for how they're living, how they're moving, how they're eating, how they're any of those things. Now, I do understand that you don't want to add crutches to anybody. You don't want to sympathize with laziness or things that are bad for society or communities. any of that. But at the same time, it's a certain type of way that you communicate with people, and straightforward is not always the way. When I'm just straight to it, no chases, no nothing. People look at me as a cold person, but that's also how people and myself look at Ben Shapiro sometimes. He has no sugar. He can care less about adding any sugar. He just goes straight for the jugular, but he actually means well. He means well. I just don't think he knows. Matter of fact, I do think he know. I think that when he realizes it's a friendly situation, he don't have to be guarded and defensive. He brings the sugar. But when he believes that he has to outwit someone and outsmart someone in a certain topic, no sugar. He just straight to it. Bow, 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 bow. And sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it isn't. But we're just getting to know the guy. And if y'all like this this reaction so far, this style of reaction, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell for me. Thank you.
Yes, exactly.
A boy can be a girl, a girl can be
people
a
will
boy.
say, well, I'll exceed, but not for my children.
Yeah.
And that's what Virginia demonstrated. It's like, you can come after me, but you come after my kids, and that's a whole different story.
It's so fundamentally opposed to everything true, and the fact that and that's the insistence. The insistence isn't that people be treated humanely or be treated decently. The insistence is that your vision of yourself be reflected by me in defiance of baseline reality, and in order to redefine how society as a whole works.
Well, a lot of it's murky thinking. You know, if someone asked me, do I believe that there are gender fluid people? I would say yes. And I would say a young man who's gender fluid, I know what he's like temperamentally. He's high in agreeableness. He's high in neuroticism. So he has a feminine temperament. He's more interested in people than things. And he's extremely high in openness. And so his temperament is fluid. He's creative, and so he's one thing one day and one thing the next. And his fundamental temperament is tilted towards the feminine. But that doesn't mean he's not a man.
Right, exactly.
So so it's murky thinking. So
that's exactly right.
It's certainly the case that 1 out of 10 women, now it depends on where you put the cutoff, say, but you could say with reasonable certainty that 1 in 10 women has a masculine temperament and 1 in 10 men has a feminine temperament. And so that's a lot of people. And those people, especially if they're also creative, well, they're kind of at a loss in relationship to what to do with their identity, because they're pulled. First of all, they have a hard time catalyzing their identity. Creative people have a hard time catalyzing it. It's like the definition of creativity. They're protean. And so there have been people who play at the edges of gender identity forever. And fair enough. And sometimes that's even admirable if it's done in a sophisticated way. And it's charismatic. So you see it in Mick Jagger, you see it in David Bowie, you see it in people like Madonna as well, because Madonna had a hard edge, that was very masculine. And all the Marvel superhero women have a hard masculine edge.
Is that what androgyny is? Like, I've been hearing a whole lot about that. Like when people are androgynous, and or they don't mind dressing like the opposite sex, or wearing certain face paints of the opposite. I mean, usually what's going on the opposite sex or something, then they just do that, but they're still straight. I don't even know why I want to know the answer to that. I guess I was just trying to really understand what Jordan Peterson was saying. Although I do get what he's saying, but androgynous is the word that I'm trying to get some clarity about.
Hard edge, that was very masculine. And all the Marvel superhero women have a hard masculine edge. And so we find that charismatic because those people are also integrated. But the notion that there's such a thing as gender, that's not right. There's variability in personality and temperament. And the idea that there's no such thing as biological sex, that's just insane.
It's insanity. They've abstracted gender from sex and then read gender back into sex as more important than sex. It's
well, and then why insist upon the biological modifications?
Right.
If there's no such thing as sex, it's like, well, then just act out your role.
Right.
Leave your body alone because it's irrelevant anyways. Well, it turns out it's not irrelevant. You have to go through the surgical transformation, which is a pretty dramatic answer to a question that for 99% of people who are ambivalent about their gender identity would be best solved without surgical intervention.
Yep.
And then so now in Canada, because they banned conversion therapy, It's now all affirmation therapy.
Right.
There's no
Conversion therapy. What's that, guys? If someone can let me know in the comments what that is.
They banned conversion therapy. It's now all affirmation therapy.
Right.
There's no such thing as affirmation therapy.
Right. No, it's insane. I mean, the semantic game that was used in order to say, well, conversion therapy, which was at one time using electric shock to treat homosexuals, and saying that that's the same thing as you have a gender-confused 12-year-old.
Look, I had a 14-year-old kid who was a client of mine, and he was in the mid stages of puberty. He was a pretty creative kid, agreeable kid as well, right? And that's important. So he had a bit of a feminine temperament. That also meant he could be pushed around fairly easily. Well, there was an aggressively gay guy in his school, was hitting on him and trying to convince him that he was gay. Well, he didn't know. So he wanted to talk to me about it. It's like, well, I was going to tell him. What the hell do I know about this kid? And I wanted to hear what his problems were and how it might be sorted out, what he wanted. And like that's what you do in therapy, is you help people sort out their problems. Now this idea is you come to me with an axiomatic claim, whatever it is about your identity, and my job is to rubber stamp it. It's like, I'm not a therapist then. So this is not only insane, this insistence. Like, I like to think of truth, untruth, and anti-truth, right? And the notion that therapists affirm is an anti-truth. Because, look, let's say you come to me and you say, you have a proposition about yourself, and I say, no, I'm your therapist. No, that's wrong. It's like, that's not good therapy. But neither is...
I never understood that, and I'm just now realizing that now. That's why they're able to ask so many questions. That's what makes them a good therapist. Sometimes it's not about having the right answers. Sometimes it's being able to ask the correct questions. And that's why therapists are therapists, because they're trained to ask the correct questions. My son, Van Jr., man, he don't even like to have a whole bunch of conversations with people too much. But we played a game as a family one time. And his job was to be a therapist. He picked up a card. He said, I'm a therapist. Which one of us he had to help? And it was my daughter, who's a 16-year-old. And she had a problem for him. And I mean, she had a problem that she was dealing with based off the card she picked up. And the way he helped her figure it out is by asking questions. And he asked like 7 questions that ended up helping her just like that. The reason why he was able to do that is because he studied that in school. That's one thing that he went to school to be for English and for psychology. So he was able to do those type of things. As a matter of fact, he had to do that for a couple of his reports for school. So I thought it was neat that him receiving that type training was able to ask certain questions that brought her to be able to have no issue at all anymore. So I thought that was absolutely dope.
No, that's wrong. It's like, that's not good therapy. But neither is you have a proposition about yourself and you're disturbed enough to come to a therapeutic session. And I say, yes, you're right. It's like, I don't know if you're right. And if you're so right, why are you here? Like, what are we talking about if you're already right?
It's a destruction of basically the only form of therapy that we know to work.
Yes,
cognitive behavioral therapy. It's all about saying that
so are the rest of them. They're all this is one of the things that's interesting about clinical psychology. Every single school of psychotherapy is predicated on the idea that free expression of thought or the free transmutation of behavior is curative. And it's true with cognitive behavioral therapy, just like psychoanalytic therapy. It's all the same thing. And also the other axiom of therapy is voluntarily expose yourself in measured doses to what you're afraid of. And so that's an interesting thing, because the psychoanalysts believed when the behaviorists first came up with exposure therapy, they had it formulated wrong. They thought you learn to be afraid. So you're normal, and then something hurts you, and then you learn to be afraid of it. That's wrong. You're always afraid, except when you...
Wow, I always thought that too. I always thought that you learned that. I thought that you was like naturally unafraid of anything. You wasn't afraid of anything at all. But then with living life and everything, you ran across some situations that just, now you're afraid for things. Like you got punched, now you're afraid to get punched. You fell, now you're afraid to fall. You got burnt, now you're afraid to get burnt. I mean, to cook or stuff like that. You thought you was drowning, you're afraid to swim. So I thought those type of things taught you fear, you know, because it almost seems as if babies and kids have no fear. And I know it seems like it's just part of that is because they have no understanding. They have no understanding, so that will add to it. But naturally, without knowing, you think that, you know, they have no fear. But I guess they don't have fear because they don't know yet. Okay. But people who do know probably always fearful. Okay, he's about to break it down to us.
And then you learn to be afraid of it. That's wrong. You're always afraid. Except when you learn not to. So they had it exactly backwards neuropharmacologically, and it really matters. This matters. That doesn't mean you can't learn some fears. You can, but mostly you unlearn terror, right? So children are afraid to get away from their mother. It's because they're afraid of the entire world. Well, you have to learn how not to be, and you don't learn that by habituation, because that was the idea. So you take someone who's afraid, they've been conditioned to be afraid, you expose them to what they're afraid of, and then you have them do relaxation exercises so they counter condition. Well, then it was discovered, and they don't have to do the relaxation exercises. It's like, oh, well, it still works, just exposure. It's like, well, they get less afraid when you expose them because their fear habituates. Like, so then the psychoanalyst said, well, if they get less afraid of that particular thing, the symptoms are just going to substitute because that fear of an elevator, say, was reflective of a deeper fear of death. I had a client I exposed to an elevator, the doors open, she said, that's a 2. It's like, and her fantasy about the elevator was, it was a place she was going to die in of a heart attack. Well, people were discomforted and, what would you say, made contemptuous of her foolishness while she was suffering and dying. So social alienation and death, that was the elevator for her. So we expose her to the elevator. What does she learn? Not to be afraid of the elevator. No. She learns she can tolerate those fears. She learns to be brave. And so the psychoanalysts were they were diametrically wrong, because if you expose someone to anything they're afraid of, effectively they get less afraid of everything, right? And so that's partly why psychotherapy is curative in that manner, is that people discover that they're bigger than their fears. They don't discover that the fears are trivial.
I think that the cult of authenticity is going to be the destruction of all psychotherapy, and then, because if the cult of authenticity is that your true authentic feelings are what makes you you, then the attempt to make you brave in spite of your fears is a suppression of your fears. It's almost like a Freudian analysis of you're suppressing your sexual desire, and this is not full authenticity.
Yeah, right. Why isn't the fear you?
Right, exactly.
The authentic you.
Exactly, and I think that that's kind of where we're going.
Man, I will sit at the table with them and not know what the hell to say. Like, what can I add to this conversation? What can I possibly add to this conversation? I don't know, man. It's just brains on brains. Two people that's just communicating on a level that I guess you need a few years of schooling in order to really be there with them.
Why isn't the fear you?
Right, exactly.
The authentic you.
Exactly, and I think that that's kind of where we're going. It seems like that.
Yeah, well, so this movement towards unity that we were talking about, this is a place I think where, like, informed liberals and conservatives could meet. It's like, well, there is this authenticity, let's say, and drive for adventure. And you see that elevated to the highest place in some sense in the more careless Disney movies. But the full manifestation of that in an integrated sense is the drive towards authenticity inside this higher order unity. It has to be, because otherwise it's disuniting. It causes fragmentation and chaos. And so it has to be subordinate to a higher order end. And then you might say, well, what is that? Part of that's the reciprocal altruism that the evolutionary biologists are always on about. It's like, some for you, some for me, some for you, some for me, in measure, right? And that makes both of us richer. And so that's part of the higher order unity, and people are intensely reciprocally altruistic.
That's great.
It's good.
Actually, if I can get a re-up on something, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. And so,
Let me tell you something. Jordan Peterson sitting there talking to Ben Shapiro about this is he still comes off as the professor. By no way, shape, or form is Ben Shapiro coming off to me as the student or as someone who's lesser than Jordan Peterson. But Jordan Peterson definitely comes off as the gentleman who is leading this conversation, and I think that's fire.
Re-up on something that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. And so it's authenticity in the service of what? Now, when Pinocchio becomes real, he's already rescued his father, right? So he's established an accord with the tradition that gave birth to him already. He's revitalized that. So when he wakes up, he's not free. He doesn't have any strings on him anymore, but he's already existing in a harmonious relationship with his father, which is a big deal. And one of the lovely things about what happens to me as a consequence of my lectures is that lots of fathers and sons come up to me and say, we've really worked out our relationship. It's like, and they're both like, you've never seen smiles like that. It's really something.
My man, he gets really emotional sometimes. The first time I've seen him get emotional like this, like he was more emotional on this other one, but the first time I seen is when he was talking to Africa Brooke and Michaela Peterson. If y'all haven't seen that reaction, please go check it out.
To be stopped on the street and to be told that, to see people so joyful about that, because it's their heart desire, you know? And that's that integration of that drive to autonomy with the family, with the father, with the mother, with the broader community. All that has to be in a higher unity.
Yeah, exactly. And I think
that's the conservative insistence, right?
Exactly. Is that there are these, the wall, as you said before, the walls have to exist. You can have autonomy, but the autonomy has to exist within the walls. And then once you let the autonomy or the rationalism destroy all the walls,
well, there's no autonomy without the walls. There's just chaos.
There's no autonomy without the walls. It's just chaos. Y'all let me know what y'all thought about that one, man. Leave any comments y'all have below, and if you have yet to hit that subscribe button, please make sure you do so on your way to the next video. Once again, guys, I am Van, and now we are all the LFR family, and I look forward to seeing you on other content, and also it would be awesome if you were inside of the Patreon as well. Don't forget, if you want to have a voice on the channel, feel free to join us on Twitch sometimes so you can make your voice known, and let me know what you would like for me to check out. I might tell you no because your reaction, what you want me to check out is whack. But guess what? A no leads to a yes, right? Not all the time, but we'll see. I love y'all.